So, with the recent Star Trek Section 31 movie having Rachel Garrett in it, and also Star Trek Online's new anniversary event ship being named after Rachel Garrett, it's got me thinking about the Ambassador class. Because Rachel Garrett also was captain of the Enterprise C, and, that was an Ambassador class, but it's got me thinking about the class because there is something about that ship that is sometimes on my mind, and that's actually more to do with the original concept version of that ship. This is the one I'm referring to, Probert's original design for the Enterprise C. I always thought this was a really interesting looking ship, and I've always wondered how this could be possibly fit into canon. And while this is something that has been attempted before by other licensed properties, I've never really fully agreed with those interpretations, so I'm kind of wanting to take a stab at this myself, because I have different ideas. Mainly that I think Probert's Enterprise C actually makes a good stand-in for a sort of refit ambassador, rather than being an early version of the ambassador like a lot of other licensed material seems to do. But first, this episode is sponsored by Star Trek Fleet Command. You guys like Star Trek, right? Well, what about video games? Well, I assume the answer to both is yes, because you're on my channel. But have you heard about Star Trek Fleet Command? Fleet Command allows you to explore the Star Trek universe, forge alliances, engage in strategic battles, and do the whole boldly going thing that Star Trek is so well known for on both PC and mobile. You'll start as the commander of a small starship tasked with building up your starbase and assembling your crew. From there, you'll expand out into the galaxy, each step taking you more and more into the experience of a Starfleet captain. Don't worry though, you'll have help along the way from notable Star Trek characters like Kirk, Spock, and Uhura, who will guide you in the basics of command. Use my link in the video's description or scan the QR code now on the screen to start your adventure now. New players, be sure to log in and do your dailies every day, because after a 7-day streak, you will receive the epic Romulan Captain Nero completely for free. Right now, veteran players can look forward to the Year of Hell Part 2 event, celebrating the 30th anniversary of Star Trek Voyager. This story arc takes place shortly after the events of Star Trek Voyager's finale, and follows 7 of 9 as she struggles to adapt to life in the Federation. It'll also feature new officers from the Voyager series like Lon Suder, Seska, and Anarax. This update will also feature a new ship, the USS Relativity, which is aimed to help your faction against the Krenim Imperium. Also be sure to use promo code Voyager30 to unlock Voyager's morale officer, Neelix. Don't forget to use my link or scan the QR code now on the screen, and get ready to engage with Star Trek Fleet Command, where you can explore the galaxy, build your fleet, and claim your legacy. Okay, first, some history. When the Enterprise D was being designed for Star Trek The Next Generation by Andrew Probert, he wanted to establish some sense of legacy and visual continuity for the Enterprise, to kind of show how we got from here to here. It was already decided, or at least assumed at the time, that the Enterprise B was going to be an Excelsior class, though the extra bits for the refit wouldn't be added until years later for Star Trek Generations. But that left the missing link of Enterprise C to be filled in, so while designing the Enterprise D, Probert also whipped up what he thought its predecessor would look like. However, this Enterprise C would never be seen on screen beyond as a silhouette on the wall of the Enterprise D's observation lounge in the early seasons of The Next Generation. When it came time to actually show the ship for the episode Yesterday's Enterprise, it was quickly realized that Probert's original concept art would be too expensive and take too long to make into an actual filming miniature. For this, Rick Sternbach designed his own version of the Enterprise C, one that would be faster and cheaper to build into a physical model. And this would end up being the Enterprise C that we saw in Yesterday's Enterprise. The model would later be reused for other Ambassador-class ships like the Excalibur, Zukov, and Yamaguchi throughout The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. There was dialogue and visual references for other Ambassador-class ships throughout The Next Generation, but these were the only 3 to ever actually appear on screen. Well, I guess technically the Horatio was on screen, but it was never seen in one piece. Because this version of the Enterprise C was Probert's original concept art for the ship, there is licensed non-canon Star Trek media that features this version of the ship as the Ambassador-class prototype, like this render of USS Ambassador for the 2012 Star Trek Ships of the Line calendar. Now, I get the logic there. This is his original version of the ship, so why not make it the original Ambassador class? However, I never really liked this explanation, because Probert's Enterprise C, to me, it looks too new, too advanced, too close to the Galaxy class. To me, the mainline Ambassador class looks too old for Probert's version of the ship to actually be the original version of the whole class. Star Trek Online actually played off of this idea as this version of the ship being more advanced than the mainline Ambassador class. What they did was introduce this ship as what they called the Narendra class, which the name being an obvious callback to the Enterprise C, that being the battle in which the Enterprise C was lost defending the Klingon colony on Narendra 3. Their lore was that this was the original design for the Ambassador class, but it was quickly realized by Starfleet engineers that the ship was just too advanced for modern construction methods at the time, this being an obvious reference to the real-world history of the ship. Stowe does that kind of thing a lot. Originally, Star Trek Online introduced this ship with their Type 7 hull design, implying that this ship was part of the Star Trek Online 2410 era. but would later revamp the ship and its default template to more closely resemble the original concept art. Now, I don't fully agree with either of these interpretations. Like I said, I do think that Andrew Probert's design looks too advanced to be an in-between for the Excelsior and Galaxy-class starships, and that Sternbach's Ambassador does a much better job of filling in that gap. But I don't agree with Star Trek Online's lore either, it being introduced as a whole new class of starship, especially so much later in the timeline. Like, I do think Probert's design does look more advanced than Sternbach's, but not 2410 advanced. Personally, I prefer to think of Probert's Ambassador class as a sort of Ambassador class refit, something akin to the refit that the Constitution class received in the 2270s. You know, when we went from original to movie era Constitution. We don't know precisely how old the Ambassador class actually is in canon, just that the Enterprise C was lost in 2344 and that the class was still active as of the late 2360s. In fact, the last chronological reference to an Ambassador class is actually in 2369 during the episode Descent in the Next Generation, where some production art features the name of USS Zhukov. In licensed non-canon media, however, there are actually several different sources that give multiple different years for the launch year of USS Ambassador, ranging between 2319 and 2325, and see the Ambassador class active well through the 2370s. The furthest one, I think, being Star Trek Bridge Commander, which takes place in 2378, which, funny enough, is also USS Zhukov. But this does at least give us a vague idea of how old the Ambassador class is. Assuming any of those launch years are actually correct, that would put the Ambassador class somewhere between 44 and 50 years old by 2369, its final canonical appearance. And at that age, it's not unreasonable to think that Starfleet would be looking at some way to extend the life of these Ambassador class ships with the form of some sort of structural refit. Especially with all the craziness going on in the 2360s, you know, Romulans, Klingons, Cardassians, Borg. Heck, the Battle of Wolf 359 alone is enough of an excuse to want to modernize the fleet. And keep in mind, the Ambassador class was not a small ship. These were pretty decent size. Obviously not as big as a Galaxy class, but honestly probably close to being roughly comparable to a Sovereign. You know, in total mass. Obviously the Sovereign is quite a bit longer, but Ambassador is taller and wider. But yeah, I'm just saying that given how big these ships are, and given that they were probably, you know, not an insignificant, you know, amount of time and resources in order to construct, it makes sense that Starfleet would want to try to, you know, extend the longevity of these ships rather than just shutter them completely. And in fact, we've actually already seen evidence of structural refits for the Ambassador already. After Enterprise C first appeared in Star Trek Enterprise, the Ambassador class model would later be modified, repositioning the saucer a little bit so it better aligned with the neck, lowering the nacelles a little bit, and making some modifications to the main deflector. Oh, and they also changed the Bussard collectors on the nacelles. I always forget about that part for some reason. But anyway, this shows that attempts were made to try to keep the Ambassador class relevant as they moved further into the 24th century, so why stop there? Well, frankly, there probably were reasons, because, I mean, we never saw another Ambassador class past the Next Generation in canon, and even in non-canon material, we didn't see them past the 2370s. So this is sort of the personal headcanon that I've developed to kind of explain all this. By the time the Galaxy class launches in the 2360s, the Ambassador class is really starting to show its age. But ships of that size and complexity weren't well suited to be moved into a lesser workhorse role like the older Excelsior Miranda class starships were. So that kind of leaves the Ambassador class in kind of a weird place, especially as more Galaxy and Nebula class starships start to launch. Eventually, it's decided, probably around 2369, that the Ambassador class is to go through a major refit in order to help it keep up with some of these newer starships, using technology that was developed and refined through the Galaxy class project. So this would lead to a newer, sleeker hull configuration, new modernized components for the class, and improved weapons and defensive systems. Now, while my whole thinking around this is to try to give a place in canon for this version of the Ambassador class, I don't think this ship would have existed for very long. I think at least a few Ambassador class ships would have been refitted into this newer configuration with the new technology, but I also feel like there are a number of factors that would ultimately lead to Starfleet abandoning the project pretty quickly. Part of it would be the craziness that would end up being the 2370s. I mean, you start out the decade with first contact with the Jem'Hadar, then a new war with the Klingon Empire, and out of nowhere the Borg try to assimilate Earth again right before the Dominion War kicks off. And this is all in the span of like 3 years. And the war wouldn't end for another 2. So it's just to say that by this point in time, needless to say, Starfleet engineers are busy. And that leads into what I think would be the major contributing factor as to why this refit wouldn't be widely introduced, the Sovereign class. The Sovereign was a big, sleek starship that lacked the versatility of the Galaxy class, but could pack a bigger punch, and that is exactly what Starfleet needed at the moment. With the new Sovereign class ships now launching, it made little sense to keep the Ambassador class going, even with these new refit versions, because ultimately the two would have occupied the same role within the fleet, but Sovereign would have been able to perform them much better. This would ultimately lead to the retirement of the entire Ambassador class line before the end of 2379. So yeah, that is my own personal headcanon for this version of the Ambassador class, and really just the Ambassador class in general. If you have any thoughts or comments on this video, be sure to comment down below, and while you're down there, be sure to like and subscribe and hit that bell for notifications. You know, usual video outro stuff, those really help out the channel, and I really do appreciate it. Either way though, thank you so much for watching. My name's Stu, and I will see you guys next time.